The Wuthering Waves 2.3 livestream ended, and everybody's talking about the rewards, how mid the anniversary feels, the usual Crow versus Genshin debate and all that noise. But I think people are sleeping on something huge. We're actually getting an endgame. Like, remember when the idea of an endgame used to be hype as all hell? I mean, it's crazy how nobody's talking about this. Now, call me a Crow Glazer, but I believe that an endgame is a pretty big deal. But here's the thing, when it comes to Crow's past endgames, I've got my concerns. Aside from the hologram events and the depths of Elusive Realm, I haven't really enjoyed their endgame content. So in this video, I want to break down why I feel that way and what I'm hoping this new endgame brings to the table. So if you're into this kind of content, do me a solid, hit the like button, subscribe and drop a comment about how you want this endgame to look like. And also hit the bell so you don't miss out on any of my future videos. Also real quick, I noticed a bunch of y'all watching aren't subscribed. So if you enjoy this content enough to like it, please subscribe. I want us to reach 300 subs before the end of this month, and then going into May we can bump it up to 500, maybe even more. It sounds crazy, but I think we can actually hit it. Alright, enough info, let's dive into it. So before we get too deep into this, we need to talk about what an endgame actually is, especially when it comes to gacha games. Now, if you've been playing these kind of games for a while, you probably already know this cycle. A version drops, it lasts about 6 weeks, but let's be honest, most of the actual playable content, it's usually over in the first week, maybe a week and a few days max. After that, you're basically just logging in, collecting dailies, maybe doing a couple of events if they sprinkle them in, but for the most part, you're just waiting for the next version to drop. And this isn't just a Wuthering Waves thing, it's the same story for other games like Genshin and Honkai Star Rail. ZZZ might be an exception, but we'll talk about that one another time. The point is that content drought is normal across pretty much every gacha game. That's exactly where endgames come in. So endgame, like the name suggests, is the content that's supposed to drop after everything else. It's the game after the game. When the main story is done, when events are over and there is nothing else to go on, endgame is supposed to be that one piece of content that sticks around. It's meant to be permanent, like really permanent, something you can keep coming back to. Now here's where gacha games kind of twist that idea. Even endgame in gacha can end. Think about it. Once you clear all the abyss floors in Genshin Impact, you basically finished that endgame. Same thing in Wuthering Waves. You beat all the TOA floors, you're done. Whimpering Waste, clear the stages, done. Even the hologram events, they're all fun, but once you beat every challenge, that's it. It's pretty much over. Most of the time, it's about rewards. Once you collect all the astrites or primogems or whatever currency the game throws at you, what's left? The reason these endgames are fun in the first place is because of the rewards. You're grinding for something, but once those rewards run dry, the motivation to keep on going just disappears. And that's the issue I have with most of Crow's endgame. They feel permanent, but they're not. You can replay them, sure, but the one thing that actually makes them worth doing, the rewards, is temporary. And if the rewards are temporary, the content doesn't feel permanent either. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying Wuthering Waves should constantly hand out top tier rewards every single time we play these endgames. That's not realistic. But I do think there should always be some kind of reward, no matter how many times we go back. Right now, each endgame gives you some currency, enough to pull for characters or weapons, depending on how deep you go into the content. But once you've cleared everything, what's left? And that's the issue. As it stands, when you get all the rewards, the endgame just ends. And I genuinely think that even after getting all the big juicy rewards, there should still be minor stuff for players who want to keep playing. Stuff like credits, actual usable in-game currency, or even level up materials. Just small rewards that feel meaningful. That way, players are encouraged to dive back in, not just because it's fun, but because they're still getting something out of it. That will make the idea of permanent content actually feel permanent. Right now, a lot of endgames talk a big game about being permanent, but they don't really follow through. But all in all, the constant rewards is a pretty small issue, something that whether they add in or subtract doesn't really change the overall enjoyment of an endgame. See, there is a much bigger problem in gacha endgames, and I've said this in so many of my videos, and honestly, I'll keep on saying it until someone hears me. One of the biggest issues with gacha endgames, especially in Wuthering Waves, is the timer. But instead of just ranting, let me explain exactly why the timer doesn't work in a game like Wuthering Waves and why it kind of ruined the whole experience. To put very short and very simple, Wuthering Waves feels very much like a Souls-like. So if you've never played a Souls game or Souls-like, but you've played Wuthering Waves, then you've probably got a bit of an idea on what a Souls-like game is about. Now, I wouldn't compare Wuthering Waves directly to a hardcore Souls-like like Sekiro or Wulong, but I say it definitely has some Souls-like elements. It's a more approachable version, sure, but it still carries that Souls-like vibe. See, the main thing with a Souls-like game is that it's not about mashing buttons, it's about timing. You have to understand enemies' attack patterns, learn when to dodge, parry and strike, and just like in Wuthering Waves, especially in those tough endgame events like the hologram fights, it's the same deal. The challenge, the trial and error, the improvements, it's all a part of the experience. And Wuthering Waves, while not as hardcore, really nails that concept of learning and adapting. But here's the problem, Wuthering Waves tries to blend being a Souls-like game with being a gacha game, and that's where things get tricky. Now, Genshin Impact is a gacha game through and through. It's not trying to be a Souls-like, it's more about spending money to make your characters and weapons stronger. And that's why timers in Genshin kind of make sense. They're there to push you to spend more on your characters and gear, because without that, it can get way harder to clear certain content. But Wuthering Waves isn't like Genshin. In Genshin, you can basically just mash buttons and use skills and bursts to win. That's the core of the game. It's about leveling up through gear and characters, and you can absolutely feel that as you play. But with Wuthering Waves, the combat is designed to be much more skill-based. Timing dodges, parries, and really learning how enemies work. That's where the problem with the timer comes in. When you throw a timer into the mix in a game that's built around skill, it completely changes the dynamic. In Souls-like games, you can take on any boss with any level as long as you are skilled enough. The challenge comes from mastering the combat and learning enemies' pattern. But in Wuthering Waves, adding the timer forces you to balance skill and spending, which just feels off. Now you're not just being challenged by your ability to react and learn, but by how much you spent on characters and gear, which doesn't sit right with a game that's supposed to be focused on skill. And that's why, to me, if Wuthering Waves keeps on going down this path, sticking to these timers and limitations in its endgame, it will never truly unlock its potential. Even though Wuthering Waves combat has the potential to be as fun as any Souls-like, it won't quite hit that level. You see, Souls games create phenomena beyond just the game itself. Look at people like Let Me Solo Her. Because of a single boss battle in Elden Ring, they became a legend. Or Miss Mika, the dance pad queen, who beats Elden Ring using just a dance pad. Then there's the Happy Hub, known for no-hit runs across all Souls games and Souls-like games. These aren't just players, they're icons. Their stories transcend the game they play. I very strongly believe that Wuthering Waves could have the same potential, but it won't get there if it sticks to the typical gacha game formula, especially with how the battles are structured. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. At its core, Wuthering Waves is a gacha game, and you cannot change that. And yes, you are right. It's more so a gacha game than a Souls-like, and I get that. So if you look at it like that, the timer kind of makes sense. It's part of the gacha formula, and again, I would agree with you there. But here's the thing. If Wuthering Waves wants to be a Souls-like and a gacha game, why not create its own version of the timer, one that works with the unique combat mechanic it sets up? Rather than just copying how the timer works in other gacha games like Genshin Impact, why not innovate? Since Wuthering Waves already sets itself apart with its combat, shouldn't the timer also be something distinct, something that complements the game's strength instead of working against it? If the traditional gacha timer doesn't fit Wuthering Waves, then what can Wuthering Waves do to make the timer work while still respecting the combat that the game is striving for? Now, when it comes to solutions for the timer, I believe Wuthering Waves has, on multiple occasions, addressed and solved the problem. Take the hologram event for example. The timer is used both in the right way and the wrong way. Here's the thing, you're given 5 minutes to beat a single enemy, which is great. And I also heard, and this is something that I have not really noticed myself, but I heard that as the timer goes down, the enemy gets stronger. I believe that is also a phenomenal thing to do. If that is true, that is a really nice way to create hardship and tension while you're fighting this enemy. But where it goes wrong is when the timer hits 0 and you lose. That's what bothers me. The timer essentially decides whether you win or lose, and that's one of the main issues I have with how gacha games use the timers. The outcome shouldn't be completely dictated by time. So where has Wuthering Waves actually done a perfect job with the timer? In my opinion, the best example is the depth of Elusive Realm. There's a reason why I consider it to be one of the best endgame modes in any gacha game. Beyond its roguelike elements, the use of the timer in this mode is really well thought out. When you're fighting the big bosses in the depth of Elusive Realm, there's a timer, but here's the twist. When the timer hits 0, you do not lose. Instead, the bosses gain a massive buff. This means that while you don't get penalized for taking too long, you do get challenged. When the timer runs out, the boss get buffed, and even a single hit could wipe you out. That is a clever way of using time to ramp up the challenge without making it feel like a timer is deciding your fate. At the end of the day, whether you win or lose will come down to your skill, and I think that is a better system all around. So, what do I want from this new endgame? Well, we've already got COA and Wuthering Waves, which heavily rely on the timer, but I'm really hoping this new endgame mode will bring out the roguelike elements in Wuthering Waves. What I mean by that is, I want it to depend purely on skill. I want to be able to walk into this endgame with a character I haven't leveled up, haven't worked on, and still have the chance to complete it. Even if it takes me hours, I want to be able to finish the endgame because there is nothing hanging over my head. If they do this right, this endgame could really solidify Wuthering Waves as one of those games that creates a phenomenon. Think of the kind of recognition someone could get for defeating an incredibly tough boss in Wuthering Waves using incredibly unconventional means. They'd be remembered as one of the greats, and the game would get more of that community-driven hype that Souls-like games have been so good at generating. Of course, for this to work, the enemies in the endgame needs to be ridiculously powerful, strong enough that it's more about skill than just pure strength. But I also understand that not everyone wants super hard content all the time, so I'd love to see a level system in this new endgame. The lower the enemy's level, the less rewards you get. The harder you make the enemies, the better the rewards. At the end of the day, I want this endgame to focus more on skill than a timer. I really want it to be a test of how well you know the mechanics and how well you can handle tough situations, rather than how fast you can clear a stage before the time runs out. But what do you think? How do you feel about timers in endgame contents? Do you like them? Do you think they can ruin the experience? I know I'll keep on saying it until something changes, but what do you all think? Drop your thoughts and comments, and as always, I'll catch you in the next one.